Have you ever gotten stuck in a difficult conversation? Have you ever felt like you've just been spinning around in angry circles with your counterpart, always hashing the same problems but never getting to a solution? Have you felt the anxiety of approaching a conversation that is likely to blow up? If you've ever felt any of these pains, stay tuned. Today's episode is all about how to navigate tough talks, get to a solution, and avoid explosions along the way. The sky was leaden when the van pulled in front of Chase Bank in Manhattan. It was about 8:30 a.m. in late September, and much of the city was still waking up to another crisp day in New York City. As the city yawned under a gray sky, two masked men departed the van, and moments later, the bank's alarms were triggered. Inside Chase, two female bank tellers and a male unarmed security guard were about to experience a day that would be talked about for decades to come. One of the masked men lashed a .357 against the security guard's skull, then dragged him to the men's room to lock him inside. When the robber returned, he subjected a teller to the same treatment. Finally, the masked man approached the last teller and forced the revolver inside her mouth. He pulled the trigger. Click. The chamber was empty. Two dark eyes stared at the teller, the .357 still wedged between her teeth. "Next one is real," the thief uttered. "Now open the vault." No worries, this story has a tense beginning but a happy ending. The question is, how did law enforcement get to the happy ending of the 1993 Chase Bank heist? According to a member of the crisis team on scene, it essentially boiled down to top-notch hostage negotiation skills. Chris Voss, one of the head negotiators at the robbery, wrote about the incident in his book, Never Split the Difference. As I read his account, one thing became glaringly apparent. The skills he used in hostage negotiations are nearly identical to the techniques that help all of us navigate difficult conversations. That's right! The techniques that high-level hostage negotiators use to rescue prisoners and defuse terrorist attacks are the same skills that would help the average Joe and Jane Doe navigate a tough talk with a spouse, a hard conversation with a coworker, or even a come to Jesus with a wayward teenager. In other words, knowing the techniques for high-pressure conversations isn't just for rescuing captives. The need for these skills is immense. Think about some of the difficult conversations you've had. Have you ever felt like the harder you try to get a resolution, the harder your counterpart pushes in the opposite direction? Have you ever felt your skin heat up as reason and logic seem to fall by the wayside with every exchange? Lives of hostages may not hang in the balance, but your life sure feels like it does. How can you excel rather than explode in a difficult conversation? To answer these questions, we're going to continue our story of the 1993 Chase Bank heist. We'll also explore some of the best research on navigating hard conversations to give you the tools you need to find resolutions with even the toughest people in your life. If you'd like to put the kibosh on bitter talks that lead nowhere, or discover how to find more solutions during a high-pressure conversation, you're in the right place. I'm PJ Aubrey, psychology grad, health and wellness coach, and your guide through the mine-filled terrain of having hard conversations. Let's get started. Chris Voss writes,
"When my partner and I arrived, I was immediately assigned to coach the police department negotiator on the phone. His name was Joe, and he was doing fine. But in these types of situations, nobody works alone. We always work in teams. Students of mine balk at this notion, asking, 'Seriously, do you really need a whole team to hear someone out?' The fact that the FBI has come to that conclusion, I tell them, should be a wake-up call. It's really not that easy to listen well."
For a moment, I want you to think about some of the tough conversations you've had that didn't go well. How well did you feel listened to? And if I asked your conversation counterpart the same question, what do you think they'd say? In failing conversations, it often feels like you are never truly understood. When you present an argument, it never gets addressed. The other guys just keep throwing out their own point of view without making any effort to understand yours. In return, you try to repeat your own position over and over until you're confident it was heard. Meanwhile, your partner is doing the same thing. In the end, all you get is more resentment, not better solutions. That's why our first strategy for succeeding in high-pressure conversations is listening. Hardcore, all-in listening. Voss explains,
We are easily distracted. We engage in selective listening, hearing only what we want to hear, our minds acting on a cognitive bias for consistency rather than truth. For those people who view negotiation as a battle of arguments, it's the voices in their own head that are overwhelming them. When they're not talking, they're thinking about their arguments, and when they are talking, they're making their arguments. Often those on both sides of the table are doing the same thing, so you have what I call a state of schizophrenia. Everyone is just listening to the voice in their head.
what happens when both people are only listening to the voice in their heads and ultimately only talking about their side? No one feels listened to. And when no one feels listened to, no one wants to listen. I'll give you one guess how well that turns out. This kind of behavior is human nature. Since the dawn of mankind, one of our species' biggest priorities has been to survive. And that means putting up a fight when we feel our needs aren't being met. Unfortunately, the way we've been programmed to put up that fight often works against us during hard conversations. Think about it. The first item on your agenda is to secure what you need. It's also the first item on the other guy's agenda, except he needs something different. You both start pushing in opposite directions, each towards their own goal, and the conversation escalates into a full-blown battle. If the conversation is to get anywhere, someone needs to break the vicious cycle. Voss has a solution.
There's one powerful way to quiet the voice in your head and the voice in their head at the same time. Treat two schizophrenics with just one pill. Instead of prioritizing your argument, in fact, instead of doing any thinking at all in the early goings-on about what you're going to say, make your sole and all-encompassing focus the other person and what they have to say. In that mode of true, active listening, you'll make them feel safe. The voice in their head will begin to quiet down. The goal is to identify what your counterparts actually need, monetarily, emotionally, or otherwise.
This kind of hyper-focus on your conversation partner's needs is easier said than done, especially when you feel your own needs are being ignored or like the other person's goals are unreasonable. However unfair it may feel to give your partner the floor, it's the first step to getting heard yourself. There's a lot of truth in the phrase, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Often it's only when your partner feels heard that they are willing to hear you. This tactic isn't just in negotiation textbooks. The art of active listening, really, truly hearing the other person, is taught to therapists, health coaches, and almost anyone who picks up a book on healthy relationships. It can be a difficult skill to master, but there are some simple tools to help you along. One of my favorite active listening tools is called reflections. Professionals may also call it mirroring, or to sound fancy, isopraxism. In a nutshell, reflecting is when you listen to what the other person has said, not just with their words, but with their tone and body language, and you repeat it back to them. It tends to be most effective when you use your own words to capture what they've just told you. When you can use your own words, it shows that you didn't just hear the sentences spoken. You understand what they mean well enough to rephrase it. You don't even have to condone what a person is saying or feeling to reflect them properly. You simply need to understand and articulate. Here's an example of what mirroring may sound like between a mother and her teenage daughter.
I'm feeling frustrated because I don't feel like I can ask you to pitch in around the house. When I ask you to do a chore, it usually never gets done.
That's because you're asking me to do way too much. You always need things done your way, and I can't fit all these things you want me to do into my own life. I have my own life in case you haven't noticed.
Okay then. So you feel like I'm giving you too much to do, especially considering the other things you've got going on. I'm also picking up that you feel like your own independence isn't really being respected.
Here are the strengths in the mother's reflections. She was successfully able to mirror what her daughter was saying, even if she didn't agree with what she was saying. She put her daughter's concerns into her own words. And when the mother said, I'm also picking up that you don't feel like your own independence is being respected. She was articulating a feeling she was detecting in her daughter, even though her daughter didn't explicitly say those things. And importantly, the mother's reflection was sincere and honest. She was really trying to get down to what her daughter meant, not trying to get her daughter to see things her own way. Let's look at a poor example of reflecting.
Really? So you feel like picking up your room is just too much to ask, and even though I spent an hour driving you and your friends back and forth to the movies yesterday, you don't feel like I respect that you have your own life?
Do you see how this response technically reflects what the daughter had said, but still doesn't create an environment where the child feels listened to? Humans can be very good sincerity detectors. They can sniff out your agenda from a mile away. In this response, the mother is using weak reflections to try and get her child to understand her. Her child will feel that immediately and will almost certainly resist. Back at Chase Bank, Voss had yet to try his own mirroring technique. Joe, the NYPD's negotiator, was still on the phone, and the team still had a lot of work ahead of them. They had yet to hear from a hostage and couldn't be sure what condition the 3 prisoners were in. The criminals hadn't made any real concessions. At one point, the robbers requested some food, which resulted in a tangle of mini-negotiations just to get the meals delivered in a way the robbers were comfortable with. Law enforcement eventually attempted to send the food using a 90s-era police robot as a delivery man, only for the robbers to change their minds and send the food back. It was time to take a risk and switch Joe for a negotiator with more specialized training. Joe got off the phone. Voss took over. The move was a gamble. The lead heist man, whom Joe had been trying to schmooze into a feeling of safety, was thrown off when he heard a different voice on the other end of the phone. "Hey," he said, "what happened to Joe?" "Joe's gone," Voss said. "This is Chris. You're talking to me now." We are about to return to Chris Voss and the Chase Bank heist. But first, I wanted to ask you something. Would you please leave a review for the podcast? Many podcast players have a place to leave a review, and our Facebook page does too. Having a lot of positive reviews will help us achieve our goal of increasing global wellness by helping us attract more listeners and also by helping us attract high-quality experts to join the program. Thanks for your help. Voss was in the hot seat now, using simple reflections to help his counterpart feel heard. He picked up where Joe left off in forging a sense of security with the robber. And by repeating what the masked man was saying, he was also communicating, "You and I, we're alike." The man, who they had now tentatively identified as Chris Watts, had been trying to keep the investigators off balance all morning. He was lying about who was in charge, casting doubts as to how many men were on the heist, and ending calls abruptly. He was still refusing to put a hostage on the phone and continually tried to disguise his voice. But as Voss continued to mirror Chris Watts, the robber started to ditch the smoke and mirrors.
The mirroring continued between me and Watts, and he made a series of damaging admissions. He talked it out in the call list we had no knowledge of at the time. That exchange helped us nail the driver of the getaway car.
The negotiators were starting to see the fruits of their labors, but there was still a long day ahead of them. This is where our second approach to difficult conversations comes in. Check your attitude.
When deliberating on a negotiating strategy or approach, people tend to focus all their energies on what to say or do, but it's how we are, our general demeanor and delivery. That is both the easiest thing to enact and the most immediately effective mode of influence.
We've circled back to that sincerity detector that people naturally have. What you say and do has a huge impact, but how you say it and do it is what drives a conversation towards success or failure.
Our brains don't just process and understand the actions and words of others, but their feelings and intentions too. The social meaning of their behavior and emotions. On a mostly unconscious level, we can understand the minds of others not through any kind of thinking, but through quite literally grasping what the other is feeling. Think of it as a kind of involuntary neurological telepathy, each of us in every given moment, signaling to the world around us whether we are ready to play or fight, laugh or cry.
Voss goes on to explain that we typically receive the energy we give off. Warmth and acceptance invites conversations to flow, while confrontational attitude will invite an uphill battle.
That's why your most powerful tool in any verbal communication is your voice. You can use your voice to intentionally reach into someone's brain and flip an emotional switch, distrusting to trusting, nervous to calm. In an instant, the switch will flip just like that with the right delivery.
Think about it. When you use an angry, pushy tone during a difficult conversation, what do you usually get back? Becoming aggressive is like crowding someone into a psychological corner. It pushes them into a defensive state rather than an open-minded, cooperative one.
Most of the time, you should be using the positive voice. It's the voice of an easygoing, good-natured person. Your attitude is light and encouraging. The key here is to relax and smile while you're talking. A smile, even while talking on the phone, has an impact tonally that the other person will pick up on.
Voss described 2 other voices in his repertoire. One that's calm and confident, he calls it the late-night FM DJ voice. And the third is the direct or assertive voice. Beware of that last option. Voss says,
Except in very rare circumstances, using the direct or assertive voice is like slapping yourself in the face while you're trying to make progress. You're signaling dominance onto your counterpart, who will either aggressively or passive-aggressively push back against attempts to be controlled.
keeping your attitude in check is certainly easier said than done. Oh, sure, you may be thinking. All smiles and bubbles while you're dying inside. How can you present the right tone when your insides are starting to roil? There's a few approaches. 1, just practice. It probably won't feel natural at first, but don't give up on it, even after you've had some failed conversations. 2, try Voss's advice to smile when you speak. And 3, before and during the conversation, keep in mind your common ground. Let's look at that common ground piece for a moment. What does finding common ground look like? One example I've experienced involves a common marital dispute: how to discipline the kids. The discipline issue has sparked many a difficult conversation between my husband and I, but we've still been able to keep our attitudes in check. Why? Because we have solid common ground between us. We both want to raise our kids in a way that will help them become happy, healthy, and effective adults. When we keep this common ground in mind, it establishes a mutual sense of respect and teamwork, opening the path to work with each other rather than against each other. For Voss and Chris Watts, the common ground may have been finding a peaceful conclusion with as little violence and surprises as possible. So, do you anticipate a troublesome conversation coming up for you? Before you initiate the talk, take some time to think about the common ground you share with your counterpart. If it's a family member, maybe the common ground is that you both love each other and want a healthy relationship. If it's a business partner, maybe it's that you both want to increase profitability, or that you both understand the importance of working on a team. Once you establish that common ground, don't be afraid to respectfully mention it in the conversation, and show your counterpart that you want to work with them, not against them. Again, maintaining a cooperative attitude is key to navigating a tricky conversation. Play around with these suggestions, trying Voss's suggestion to smile, looking for common ground, and practice. You can experiment with some of your own solutions to helping you foster a wholesome attitude before you enter a difficult conversation. Once you find your groove, you'll be amazed at the difference attitude makes. For Voss, his demeanor was definitely making a difference with Chris Watts. When speaking to Chris, Voss decided that the late-night DJ voice was his best bet. And as he put it,
The tide was turning.
Voss finally persuaded the robbers to put a hostage on the phone. The interaction was brief. All the woman would say was, "I'm okay." But at least the negotiators had evidence that the captives were alive. Slowly but surely, Voss and another negotiator, Dominic Messino, continued their progress with Chris Watts. And though the day was stretching arduously long, Voss asserts that taking it slow wasn't entirely a bad thing.
Going too fast is one of the mistakes all negotiators are prone to making. If we're too much in a hurry, people can feel as if they're not being heard, and we risk undermining the rapport and trust we've built. There's plenty of research that now validates the passage of time as one of the most important tools for a negotiator.
How can you prevent yourself from moving too fast and jeopardizing a productive conversation? Well, our next tip comes from the beloved marriage psychologist, John Gottman. You may have heard of one of Gottman's most famous experiments. He would measure couples' vitals as they engaged in discussing a difficult topic. He discovered that when physiological markers of distress began to rise, the conversation was almost guaranteed to go awry. In other words, when heart rate and blood pressure increased, couples were entering very dangerous territory. There was a simple solution to avoiding an explosion: taking a break. John Gottman observed that couples that took breaks when their emotions flared were able to return to a state of calm and continue a logical conversation, whereas couples that didn't take a break had more explosive conversations and less reconciliations. Gottman recommended a minimum break of 20 minutes to allow your physiology to return to a calm state. Voss and Dominic were starting to see the products of their own patience. The team was beginning to capture more and more victories. First, Chris Watt's only remaining accomplice agreed to come out. When this accomplice agreed to go with Chris that morning, he had thought they were only going to steal an ATM, not take hostages. A few hours later, one of the hostages was released. Then another, and another, and another. Finally, Chris Watts himself came out of the building, eyes darting back and forth, and was arrested. The hostages were bruised but otherwise unharmed, and Voss would go on to become one of the FBI's most legendary hostage negotiators. We covered a lot of conversation techniques during the story of the 1993 Chase Bank heist. Let's take a moment to go over the takeaways for navigating tough talks. 1. Listen actively. When it's time to enter a difficult conversation, put your active listening hat on, especially at the beginning of the conversation. This will help your counterpart to feel safe and create an environment where you can work with each other instead of against each other. The best way to actively listen is to be genuinely caring and curious about what the other person needs. If that's a hard mindset to get into, I get it, I've been there. Try to reflect back what the other person is saying and feeling. You don't have to agree with your counterpart to offer quality reflections. All you need to do is show them that their thoughts and feelings are understood well enough for you to articulate them back. Tip number 2, check your attitude. To avoid putting your conversation partner in an uncooperative attitude, try your best to have a helpful, positive demeanor. This is easier said than done, especially if the topic at hand gets you anxious or heated. Some helpful techniques to keep that attitude in check include A. Trying to smile. This could put your partner at ease and even help you feel a bit better. Take care that it's not a condescending smile. B. Think about your common ground. If you can, ponder this before the discussion. When done with respect, pointing out your common ground during a discussion can work wonders. C. Practice, practice, practice. Keeping a positive and friendly attitude during a difficult conversation is hard, but just like playing an instrument, you'll get better with practice. Number 3. Slow things down. This isn't a sprint. Trying to get to your point too quickly can be a big turnoff. Take your time to understand your counterpart, and if things start to go awry, take a break. It takes the body about 20 minutes to return to a calm state after getting frazzled, but it's well worth the wait. One last thing to keep in mind about all of this: Chris Voss and his fellow negotiators weren't involved in a long-term relationship with the bank robbers. Chances are, most of your difficult conversations will be with someone you need to get along with long-term. And hey, maybe even someone you care about a great deal. That's something to keep in mind about the techniques we'll be sharing today. Techniques are great, but without sincerity, really giving some value to how your counterpart feels, the power of these techniques is limited. Pretending to care can come off as manipulative or self-righteous, but actually caring about the other person will propel you into much more effective conversation. I get it, it's way easier said than done. Sometimes you have to remind yourself that your counterpart's needs matter as much to them as your needs do to you. Sometimes recognizing your own shortcomings and offering an olive branch is the best way to get through a conversation and ease someone's pain, all at the same time. Hey, We're all human, and we're all in this together. We give our thanks to Chris Voss and his book, Never Split the Difference, for offering the scaffolding for today's wellness tips. If you're interested in reading his bestseller, check out the link I've included in the description. Please note that AI voices were used to assemble today's episode, including the voice of Chris Voss. Thanks everyone for another great week of health and wellness. We're nearing the end of today's episode, but first it's time for the Silver Liners Challenge. This challenge, if you haven't heard yet, is designed to be a simple, actionable task you can accomplish to improve your mental health before we even get to our next episode. Ready? This week's Silver Liners Challenge is start a conflict with someone so you can practice some conversation techniques. Nah, just kidding. This week's challenge is to practice active listening, whether or not you're facing a difficult conversation. Again, one of our favorite active listening techniques is reflecting the other person's thoughts and feelings. Give it a shot and watch the magic happen. Thanks for listening, everyone. If this podcast has brought you any value, don't forget to leave a review on your podcast player of choice or on our Facebook page. And in the meantime, I want to give one more shout out, and this time it's for our intern, Levi. Levi has been doing an incredible job helping to grow our social media presence, and we're so lucky to have him. Thank you, Levi. You are awesome. Last but not least, one of the favorite parts of our show, the cheesy joke of the week. Let's just say that this is an example of what not to do during a hard conversation. A husband and wife get into a huge argument. They are calling each other names, swearing, and throwing things at each other. Finally, the wife grabs a suitcase and throws a bunch of the husband's clothes into it and says, "That's it. I've had enough of you. Take this suitcase and get out!" As he's leaving, she says, "I hope you die a slow, painful death. I want you to be miserable for every minute of the rest of your life." The husband pauses, looks back at his wife with a confused look on his face and says, "So you want me to stay now?" Guys, try and avoid conversations like this. You have the tools now. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.